Good morning if you're in Latin America, and good afternoon, good evening if you're in other parts of the world. Thank you so much for joining this eDialogue on what future for small-scale farming. We're holding this on behalf of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Foresight for Food, IFAD and APRA. I'm Jim Woodhill. I'm the lead of the Foresight for Food initiative based in Oxford in the UK. Foresight for Food is working to strengthen foresight and scenario capacities for food systems transformation. This whole series started back in July. We had a kickoff session then to look at some of the bigger pictures around small-scale farming and the future of food systems, and then we had a local perspective session in August. Today and tomorrow we're holding a series of sessions across Latin America, East Asia, South Asia and Africa, trying to explore what are some of the differences across the regions around the role of small-scale farmers. And we'll have a synthesis session tomorrow afternoon. And then in November, we'll be having 2 extra sessions, one on pathways of transformation, and another session will bring it all together in terms of what are some of the bigger policy challenges. Apologising for some of the rescheduling we've had to do due to unavoidable circumstances around COVID and other issues. This eDialogue is really put into the context of the wider discussion around transforming food systems and some of the enormous challenges we face in terms of both nutrition, continuing to tackle poverty, and also the impacts of climate and environmental issues. We know that small-scale agriculture is absolutely critical for the livelihoods of many, many rural people. But at the same time, we also understand how much some of the bigger issues of food systems and food markets are really rapidly changing. And we also see a tremendous change in the sort of diversification of household incomes and needing to recognise that small-scale farmers are actually a very diverse group of people. So partly what we'd like to do in this discussion this morning, Latin America, is to really unpack some of these differences, some of these challenges, and explore what you see as some of the pathways forward for enabling small-scale farmers to tackle ongoing issues of poverty, inequality, and leaving people behind. On the other hand, the role that they can play in contributing to a more nutritious and sustainable food system. So with that, let me move on to asking our panel to begin with some of their insights. What we'll do is ask each panelist to give a few minutes of their own perspectives. Each of them have selected some thoughts around the key issues that are behind this session. And then we'll move into a general discussion and try to draw together some of the thoughts. And towards the end of the session, we'll be giving each panelist a chance to draw out a couple of their key messages. Please, if you've got any questions you'd like answered, put them in the text box on the side of Zoom, and we'll bring those to the attention of the panelists. So with that, let me pass over to Milena. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce yourselves. If you wouldn't mind, you'll do a better job than I will, and it'll save time. Milena, over to you.
Hi, good morning in Latin America. Hello to everyone. I am Milena Umaña, sociologist with a master's degree in applied agriculture and forestry science for the Swiss School of Agriculture. I am a researcher at the Latin American Center of Rural Development called REMISP at the Colombian office. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for being connected with us from different parts of the world. I just want to say as my opening perspective that I am very pleased to speak about the challenge, but more of all about the potentials of the small-scale agriculture in Colombia and the region of Latin America. And although they have a lot of difference across the countries that depend on the features of and history of each country and its relationships with the physical and geographic environment, they also have many common aspects that can give us a picture about the future and potentials to overcome poverty in some cases and continue to consolidation, their consolidation path as food providers for the region in a moment when, because of COVID and a lot of other crises around the world and many other aspects, we are facing probabilities of food scarcity, then I am sure this dialogue will be very productive in this way. Give us some new ideas and perspective about different countries in Latin America, and that you can compare as well with other parts of the world and other dialogues going on with this very important initiative. And thank you again for inviting me. And yes, to respect my 3 minutes, I will stop there.
Maybe just a brief follow-up question there, Milena. I mean, how important do you see small-scale agriculture in the sort of future development of Latin America at the moment? Because, you know, the numbers of small-scale farmers have reduced a lot. There's a lot of other activities going on, and some might argue, well, you know, how important are they really to continuing to tackle ongoing inequality and poverty and nutritional issues across the region?
I think according to FAO and a lot of studies in the region, small-scale farming is extremely important, not only for food production and nutrition, but as well for the diversification of local economies and the rural areas. Because they increase the demand of service and products and contribute as well to the workforce in non-agriculture activities in the rurality. It's not a secret that, for instance, in Colombia, we have a long time conflict in the rural areas that have totally changed our rural world. And for sure, the small-scale agriculture are still being on their work to provide us food, good food, and they are challenged a lot of goals and challenges with climate change, and their capacity and resilience is very impressive. I think in this way, the environmental constraints and climate change will be considered as factors determining the productive dynamics of small-scale agriculture. But for me, it's very important, and I want to underline their capacity to overcome these problems, these challenges, and their capacity to resilience and continue to provide us food in some countries in conflictive contexts, and in areas where the capacities and the public roads are not the optimal.
Thank you, Claus, over to you. And I mean, taking a sort of big picture perspective from IFAD that's really focused on tackling issues of rural poverty. Now, how are you seeing small-scale agriculture and its future, and how that links into the IFAD agenda across the region?
Right, Jim, many thanks for this. Well, my introduction would be that I'm the country director for IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development in Brazil. And I'm also heading the Center for South-South Technical Cooperation and Knowledge Management here in Brasilia. For us, the investments in small-scale agriculture are really important because we see that they are providing very many useful services to society at large. It's not just producing food, as Milena was saying. And I also think that it's very important that small-scale farmers are basically the guardians of biodiversity, not only of the cultivated species which people are eating, and the species of animals which they're keeping, which is very important for agriculture in the future in general, because we can see that the agribusiness side, which in Brazil is very strong, is really concentrating on very few varieties and species, and is providing an environment in which other species do not thrive, cannot survive at all. So this is really important that they're providing this service to the society and to our survival at large. I want to look at your question from an angle of the markets, because obviously it's very important that these small-scale producers are really providing most of the food which is reaching the tables of people in Latin America, because the large-scale farming is mainly for export, and the local consumption mainly stems from small-scale producers. We see that basically also through the pandemic, there have been a couple of changes in the way in which the demand for food manifests itself. I see mainly two big trends. On the one side, you have the consumers which are very quality conscious, which are demanding fresh and safe local food, often knowing their producers and with some sort of certification, sometimes even organic. And on the other side, we see that many consumers, especially those who've had their income greatly reduced, are looking for low prices, and they want readily available cheap food. And these are two big trends which also small-scale farmers need to respond to. At the same time, we see that many consumers are now buying more processed food and much less fresh food, also by the restaurants not being as active as they used to be in the past. And that is also something which farmers need to adapt to. And we see that really for small-scale farmers, it's a big challenge to tally their production to this change in demand. And often they have to become more specialized in order to do that. I see that investments are very important in order to allow small farmers to make these specializations. They need technical assistance. They need to manage multiple contacts for their marketing activities, because they still need, and they will always need, diversified production for risk management purposes on their small farms. And for this, I think it's very important that meaningful services are arranged in groups or associations and cooperatives, mainly for the marketing of their produce. And this is also why eFood is working with very strong emphasis on strengthening these farmer groups and making sure that they are providing useful services to their members. And at the same time, we think that it's very important that small farmers are using information and communication technologies to their advantage, mainly for accessing technical assistance, but also for marketing activities and also for accessing financial services. And just for the TA, I'd like to remind you that in Northeast Brazil, which is where the area where eFood is working in Brazil, where we have something like 2 million small-scale farms, only about 8% of the farmers are getting technical assistance services. So 92% are not getting an extensionist any time, never. And this is really important. And I think this can only be overcome with ICT, with digitalization of services. And I think that's also very important to make investments in that area. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Klaus. I think, that was a really interesting perspective in bringing to the fore the issue that it's not just about small-scale farmers tackling their own poverty or rural poverty, but in fact taking a much broader sense about the wider societal benefits and services that they're offering. And so I think that's a really interesting theme for us to pick up a little bit more. Peter, let me move to you and get you to introduce yourself and hear some of your opening perspectives.
Yes, thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for the opportunity of being here today. My name is Heitor. I am Brazilian, but I'm currently living in the Netherlands, and I have been working with family farmers in Brazil for more than 10 years, but in the southeast region of Brazil. And I have a PhD in soil science and plant nutrition and production ecology and resource conservation in Wageningen and Universidade Federal de Viçosa in Brazil, so both in the Netherlands and Brazil. And yeah, I would like to start saying, like, because I said family farming, and the debate now today we are using the term smallholder farming, and in Latin America, I think this is a very important debate. And for us, the concept of family farmers is very important and is different than the concept of smallholder farmers. But of course, there are many overlaps. Anyway, maybe I will use these two words as synonyms, although they are not. So I would like to start saying, for me, one of the biggest challenges for family farmers is the pejorative view that society in general has on family farming or smallholder farming. seeing it as an antiquated way of doing agriculture or old-fashioned way that is inefficient, that is related to poverty and related to little knowledge and to little culture and so on. And this has serious consequences for education, for extension services, for credits, and for policies that are totally not directed and adapted to the reality and the needs of family farmers. As Claus was saying, for instance, extension services are not reaching family farmers many times. And when they reach, also many times they have power relation, that there are power relations behind that maybe avoid that farmers get the best advice. And so I think this is one of the biggest challenges. But actually what we see, if we check the data and the evidence, we don't see all these pejorative views in reality, because for instance, according to the census, the agricultural census in Brazil, it's a bit old, this data from 2006, but I think it's still valid. Family farmers, they occupy 25% of the land in Brazil. So 75% is for non-family farmers and 25% for family farmers. And still they produce 39, almost 40% of the total agricultural value in the country. So both exports and import, but both for exportations and importations. So with 25%, they reach 39 of the total agricultural value. And that doesn't seem so inefficient to me. And I would like also to say that I do see pathways forward, and I do see a lot of opportunities as well. And I would like to highlight three main things that I think are really important. And of course, we can debate more during the session. So for me, one of the things is policies. So public policies, including access to land, access to extension services, access to credits, and so on. And we have great examples in Brazil of policies that worked out pretty well. For instance, the PNI and the PA. I can talk more about these policies if you have questions or you want to debate more about this, but these have been quite successful. The second thing is to have strong social organizations working together. So including farmers organizations such as unions and associatives, because that gives power and voice to farmers and also gives them the chance to organize themselves and to develop together with a great variety of stakeholders like scientists and technicians to really develop appropriate strategies that are adapted to the local reality. And finally, the third thing is the role of women, because I think this have been emerging now, this debate, and it's so important. And we have some research, not my research, but from a group that I was part of. They had these cadernetas agroecológicas. So they would give this to the families and they would ask the woman of the family to write down everything she produced, but was not sold, just produced and consumed within the family or traded with other families. And the amount, and they put economic value to each of these products. And in the end, the woman is producing so much, almost as much as the coffee that is being sold. So this is so important. And then many times we present as a solution to just have more cash inflow, but that's quite simplistic because there are other things related to economic issues that we need to tackle. So thank you.
Thank you, Hato. Really, really interesting topics. I could see lots of heads nodding there, so I'm sure we'll come back to some of these things. Maija, let me turn to you, and I'm sure you're going to take us back to a bit of a systems perspective on all of this as well, given your background. But how do you see some of these issues that we've started to raise? And please don't introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So my name is Maija Peltola, and I'm an anthropologist, but I've been working the intersection of business and public sector and private and public sector for the last almost 20 years. I'm IFAD country director for Guyana, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, and I'm based in the IFAD sub-regional hub in Panama City. And yes, actually, I want to bring to the table two examples of really concrete action with smallholder or small-scale farmers, and that relates also to the food systems. And I think both of these examples illustrate quite well how from IFAD side we try to work with smallholders and producers and also these market women who tend to come from the same families and the same rural households and thus belong to the same kind of rural ecosystem. So when we're talking about smallholders or family farmers, where I think we should be actually talking about a bigger group of people. And one of my examples comes from Haiti and the other one from Guyana, or former British Guyana. And in both countries, we're in the midst of co-designing together with stakeholders and of course with the governments, actions that can bring about sustainable rural transformation. And as you said, Jim, at the very beginning of this session, everything starts from understanding the diversity and the context of these people and recognizing that you must not use the same approach everywhere. And as you might have guessed, the situation of rural women and men in these contexts and these countries is very different. In Haiti, on one hand, we have a country with protracted crisis, which has pushed small farmers to extreme vulnerability and food security. The country sits on a hurricane belt, and deforestation and erosion are major problems because of the soil has degraded in many of these farmlands. And thus in Haiti, what IFAD is doing is that we're financing agroforestry. So that's linking sustainable farming practices together with reforesting practices. And also we have for the last 15 years been financing small-scale irrigation systems, which bring the possibility of having better use of resources, especially of water resources to the rural women and men. And but now our newest financing in Haiti will be geared towards a slightly different environment, and I want to highlight this here because it makes actually much sense on a Caribbean island. So we'll be financing a project in the coastal communities and the world underwater. So the new inclusive Blue Economy project seeks to transform the way rural coastal communities manage their resources, and the systemic change or the change in the mindset behind this is that we're not going to finance a more traditional artisanal fisheries project, but we will try to make the marine conservation in these areas a source of sustained income. Now, in looking ahead, these revenues may come from, for example, small-scale fisheries. They may come also from aquaculture, production of sea moss or seaweed, blue forests, or that would be mangrove conservation, and also ecotourism. And what is really key here to understand is that these communities really have to lead the journey, and they have to understand how the coastal ecosystem works, what is their role also in maintaining it and improving those resources, and also to hold accountable those who do harm and overexploit these resources. And really the only local ownership will contribute to sustained results. On the other hand, we have Guyana, which is, as you know, a country in crossroads where oil and gas money has started already to flow to the US-based Natural Resources Fund. Guyana is the only country in the Latin America region which is actually predicting a rise in its income, national income, even in the midst of COVID. And in Guyana, the whole food system is in transformation. We have, on the one hand, we have the Amerindia communities where they use a lot of meat and tuberculosis. But also in Guyana, we have the country which is facing the triple burden of malnutrition. So we have undernutrition, we have micronutrient deficiencies, and also at the same time, a significant part of the population who is struggling with overweight and obesity. And over 70% of these deaths in Guyana are caused by non-communicable diseases, most of which are linked to unhealthy diets and lifestyles and constitute a major economic burden also for the country. So here in Guyana, we are building on the identified demand in the country. We have identified this demand by having multiple rounds of stakeholder consultations. So there, IFAD plans to work together with the government to support enhanced food security and healthier food system by building on farm-to-table gastronomy, national tourism, and also taking the best advantage out of digital tools. So also here in Guyana, small-scale farmers and fisherfolk can play a significant role in improving the whole food system in the country. And I think that we can all agree that local food security and sovereignty have become even more significant now in the aftermath of COVID-19, and when we learned that the food staples couldn't be exported, that all the borders were closed, etc. So I think it's really important also to make sure that the right systems are in place for the smallholders and the family farmers in Guyana also to be part of this journey towards a major transformation in the food system and also towards better food security and sovereignty. So these are two examples from my side, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and I look forward to the discussion. Over to you, Jim. I think you're on mute, Jim.
We all have this trouble of remembering to turn our mics back on in this virtual world. No, thank you, Maija. That's, I mean, really interesting, and I think it was particularly significant to hear on one hand talking about what's the role of family farms, coming back to or small-scale farmers in terms of environmental protection and thinking about their incomes coming from completely different sources than perhaps we're used to, and also coming back to this whole triple burden story about some of the bigger challenges that are going to face society around that and the role of family farming and small-scale agriculture in that. So we'll certainly come back to some of those points that you have raised. So Alejandra, what would you like to add to what you've been hearing, and what are some of the really important perspectives you see around this story?
Yes, well, Jim, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this conversation. My name is Alejandra Arce. I'm based in Lima. I am an associate scientist at the International Potato Center with Andean Initiative. My background is in ecology, then I pursued my PhD in agroecology, and I've been thrilled to actually, in other countries that are represented here in this conversation, Brazil, Colombia, even Haiti, I've had the pleasure to actually interact with smallholder farmers and local NGOs who are doing really hard work there. And right now, I work with Andean Initiative since last year. Andean Initiative is a new regional platform. It represents Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and Bolivia. And I will be referring mostly to the context above 1,500 meters above sea level across the Andes. And I would like to highlight that in the small-scale farming context that we are developing our strategy with, our 2020-2030 strategy, there are like 3 themes that I would like to highlight: agrobiodiversity, and differentiated domestic market systems, agroecological regeneration and intensification in already strained landscapes, food systems, especially food sheds at subnational local scales, and 2 cross-cutting issues, which are youth. I would argue that youth are a moving target. The rural-urban dynamics. I think we have been working for a long time with this dichotomy of rural and urban. And right now what we are seeing is the contexts are very dynamic. And also, as Heitor mentioned, the gender issue. I think that we could probably agree in this panel that there are big trends across Latin America that have resulted in a number of reports regarding the feminization of agriculture, the so-called permanent male exodus, and also youth, the abandonment of fields, the abandonment of small-scale agriculture, which in the context of the Andes, I would argue is mostly small-scale farming under 5 hectares. Just based on Peru's figures, about 80% of family farming is under 5 hectares. We actually have a very, very good typology that was done in 2017 by FAO. And according to this typology, family farming is up to 10 hectares in the context of Peru, which is also applicable in contexts like Bolivia and Ecuador. And also what I would like to make the nexus with a couple of things that Claus mentioned, which is the markets, and specifically differentiated markets. I think that we have some good lessons learned in the Andes. There is no one-size-fits-all for small-scale farming. At the micro scale, there are experiences with value chains. However, we have learned that these value chain approaches towards market integration of small-scale farmers usually don't reach the most vulnerable households. Usually most resourceful households already become part of these interventions. So that is still a challenge. At the International Potato Center, we have for a long time had these experiences specifically on the potato, but as I mentioned earlier, agrobiodiversity is one of the comparative advantages of Andean small-scale farmers. I think before this entering the panel with Jim, we were talking briefly about, well, what makes small-scale agriculture in Latin America? I mean, how is it different? Is it comparable to Africa or Asia? And for sure it is not. We do not have like a critical mass of small-scale farmers as in Asia, where with population densities of just farmers and consumers in urban areas are huge. But what I think would differentiate Andean smallholders and family farmers, so maybe smallholders is less than 2 hectares for us, but I will refer just to in general farmers under 5 hectares. They are managing large numbers of cultivars of different roots and tubers, but also fruits. We are conducting a study right now to actually do research on the nutritional content of many neglected, underutilized Andean species, which are not necessarily just roots and tubers. So I would actually say that there are many research questions that we're tackling with, like the linkages with nutrition, also the market linkages, what market approaches work in which context and which do not. But I would actually just finish with another item that Claus mentioned, with his extension services in the Peruvian context, which is what I am more familiar with at this moment. We know that there's a huge gap, and digital extension is actually being conducted by even startups. So this demand in the small scale farming sector has actually motivated many initiatives, even from many young people, startups, creating digital advisory services focused in agroclimatic prediction. But most interestingly, and especially during COVID, the kinds of services that help farmers make connections with consumers. at the local food systems level. And so I think I would just leave it there to leave some room for the discussion. I see incredible challenges. Also, we can discuss small-scale agriculture and specifically family farmers in the Andes without addressing just social inequity, period, that permeates Peruvian society. We have seen in Peru the outcome, the first results of the COVID pandemic. And despite the favorable macro indicators that Peru has seen in the last 2 decades, the stark social reality in urban and rural areas became plain and clear. So I will leave it there.
We'll come back to those thoughts. Look, it was a really interesting introduction from everybody, and one of the things that strikes me is really hearing somewhat of a reframing of the role of small-scale agriculture into wider societal problems and how you understand these linkages in a whole range of different dimensions. I think it'll be interesting for us to move on to perhaps what are some of the policy implications of that. But before we do that, I'm wondering if we could have a little bit more of a discussion around the diversity of small holder or family households. So, I mean, I can imagine you have those that are becoming more commercial, earning most of their income from a commercial or largely commercial operation. You've got some that have got a very mixed income where farming is just a very small part of what their incomes are. You've got others that are still holding onto a small bit of land almost as a pension or a security and only use it in a marginal way. You've got other households that are still in a very semi-subsistence way and in a very sort of marginal context. So I'm wondering if you can just reflect on how you see these different groups. Do we need to understand a better sort of categorization, and what are some of the implications of that for policy? But maybe Claus, I could start with perhaps some of your reflections on this diversity.
Yeah, well, I think this diversity, Jim, is really a key aspect of small-scale farmers. We have small-scale farmers producing all sorts of things, and on each farm we have a great diversity also, not only livestock and also crop production, but they are producing very many different types of crops, and even within each crop often they are producing different varieties, because they know that if the rain doesn't come, they have to have another variety of, say, maize or sorghum in order to be able to produce other, to still have a meaningful production, and in order to space out the production over time. There are many reasons. Main one is risk for this diversity. And I think this is really one of the key characteristics and strengths that small-scale farmers have, and for which reason they should never emulate the mechanized large-scale farming, even though, of course, efficiency is also really important for them. There's never been an abundance of labor for small-scale farmers. I also see this question on the chat here asking about the lack of labor affecting the viability of family farming, especially with the exodus of youth. That's of course a huge issue, and it's always been an issue, and smallholder farmers need to always make sure that they are employing their time meaningfully and gainfully, because there is no excess labor available, even though some people have the impression that people in the rural areas, they don't really do that much. They're doing as much as they can, and they're using all their available daylight hours in order to be gainfully employed, especially women. It's really this. I think that's an important element that Hafer was mentioning here, about the importance that women play in this whole production cycle, and that's also involving the post-production, small-scale processing and so on, which is going on. So I think this diversity really is part of the strength, and any modernization efforts in family farming need to take that strongly into account.
Thank you. Would one of you like to jump into this discussion about trying to understand the diversity of farming households?
Yes, I would like to add a couple of comments, and indeed, I think when you it gets especially interesting when you look at the subnational provincial and local levels, because while we do see these patterns, for instance, in youth migration, I will get back to the diversity of smallholder farmers as well. But you know, in some provinces here in Peru, there's intermittent migration. So, you know, youth can leave and then they'll go back for the potato harvest. So it's not like cut and dry. It's not like all across the Andes, the dynamics are the same. And for sure, in the Andes, due to the vertical farming, like vertical archipelagos, it's incredibly diverse. Just at the landscape, but also the social and cultural dynamics. And that makes this small-scale agriculture very heterogeneous. And as I mentioned earlier, not all small-scale farmers are the same. There are, even within communities, there are stark disparities between households. We have the experience that I mentioned earlier. It was actually an experience with PepsiCo and Frito-Lay. It was a very well-intended intervention, but it really did not work out. And there was a publication about this by Penn State University in the United States, how these interventions, I mean, SID also invested quite a bit in participating in this collaboration with the intention of really including the most vulnerable households. But what this study discovered following this value chain approach was that it reached maybe up to 30% of the community, and that 30% were already most resourceful households. So there are pre-existing conditions that smallholders must meet in order to even participate in these interventions. So I think just keeping that in mind. And also going back to women, feminization, again, is not cut and dry. What we are seeing across Andean communities is that now households, like women and men, are migrating, and especially young women. Young women have no interest to remain on the field. They are seeking jobs in Lima, especially in precarious conditions. But if the household is more resourceful, they can actually afford to maybe pay for a technical school in a nearby city. So the dynamics are tricky. And here again, I would say that how to make agriculture attractive, like what kinds of incentives are going to lead young people to look at farming differently? Because I think, as Ater might have said, it's not, there's cultural baggage against being a farmer. You know, it's not seen as a prestigious activity. Farmers, even while they're aging, the average age now in the Andes is 55 years old. The demographics are not in favor of the future of small-scale agriculture. So I would say that it's extremely urgent to really have tailored policies and programs that, considering heterogeneous environments and capacities, even at the land, at the soil level. I mean, we are seeing some fragile environments now, depleted soils. So we have biophysical limitations as well. So there are many parameters to keep in mind, but I would also say that there are some really interesting initiatives happening right now with young people, small-scale agro-industries adding value to underutilized and neglected agrobiodiversity, which also has ecosystem services.
Right. Thank you, Alejandra. I mean, just picking up on that one, Milena, do you have some thoughts about the degree to which households are now matching farm income with off-farm income and the implications of that? So, you know, whether it's labouring, whether it's remittances, you know, we've talked a lot about people sort of migrating but still keeping links with the land. So what's in terms of that sort of household economic diversification, and what do you think of the implications of that? And maybe, Heitor, you'd also like to pick up on this theme.
Yes, first of all, relating to the last questions, I want to add as well that just the criteria of the size is not sufficient to define small-scale agriculture. And as I Heitor say, in Latin America, we sometimes speak about farming, familiar farming and small-scale agriculture. But this is because as well this has to be with the reproduction and the social reproduction and continue to have better policies. I think we have to do a better effort to improve the definition at the technical and the theoretical and political level to understand this difference, because that has to do as well with the difference in the income and in the different ways they work. And despite the increase of the income diversification and the increase in the non-agricultural income, what we can see is that normally agriculture continues to be the main activity at the economic level for small-scale farming in Latin America, and a main source of their income. That have like two points of view, and at one point they're diversified, but to be attached for agriculture made them somehow like more vulnerable as well, because they depend of non-stable and formal markets and the prices that are very irregular. And what we can see is that they specialize somehow in agriculture, and the non-agricultural income increase, but is not like the main. In the way that you asked about the migration, and in countries like Colombia, and Alejandra knows more than me, but Peru in their conflict years, the migrations of men to the urban areas have as well like two ways of see that. In one point, that is a way to diversify the economic and household incomes, because they have the returns of money from the urban works, but as well this has to do with the feminization. And other phenomena that we can see is that the young are not staying in the rural areas, and they don't want, in generally, it's difficult to generalize in this kind of works. But in general, the young don't want to stay in the rural areas because they don't see a lot of opportunities. They have like less scholar years, the opportunity to go to the universities, to have better jobs, better incomes are normally in the cities. Okay. That I think in this way, development alternative outside the agricultural sector should be so to encourage the diversification of local economies, and as well like see other opportunities in the rural areas as tourism, thing like artesanías, I don't know how to say it in English, handcraft, yeah. Handcraft, like more agroecological and specialized agriculture is for sure an opportunities. But I think that have a lot to do as well that we have a lack in data and information about this kind of farmers. And I think besides Brazil have a very well census, like continuously. The other country doesn't have this kind of data, and then we have a lack of information in the kind of diversification and income diversification. But yes, I will leave it like
Thank you, Milena. We'll come back to some of those points. I mean, Heita, how do you see this issue about household diversification and economic diversification and some of the implications of that for household strategies and the implications on farming?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think this, of course, is a very relevant issue. And from a scientific perspective, we work a lot with farm typologies, and the typologies help to map the different groups, although many times we don't have really clear-cut groups, but rather a gradient of farms. But it helps, the typology helps a lot to unravel these different characteristics and to develop specific strategies for different types of farms. So I think this is one very important thing. I have some research on that I can share if you like. And also the second thing I would like to say is about the question on labor, because we talk about the lack of labor, and I think this is totally relevant and really important issue. And for instance, when we go to education, education plays a central role because the youth is the next generation, and how the youth is being educated. In regular schools, when they go to regular schools in the city, they are kind of dominated by this pejorative view on family farming as something old-fashioned and not efficient and bad and associated with poverty and so on, as I was saying. And then we have, for instance, in our work, the experience of the rural schools. And in these rural schools, the students, they can learn like the regular courses of mathematics and chemistry and so on, but they also learn about agriculture and to value agriculture. And also they have an alternancy scheme that they can stay 15 days in the school and 15 days with their families working. And then this kind of education really opens for many, really open for many possibilities. So the student, the young farmer can choose whether to continue with farming with a good educational background that values this kind of work, or if he wants to go to the city and become a professional in other areas, but for sure sensitive for the issues of family farmers. So I think this is very important. And then just to finalize, on the one hand, we have this problem with labor, but on the other hand, we have millions or thousands, I would say even millions of landless farmers, people that want to farm but don't have land. So, you know, how do we talk about lack of labor? I mean, I think of course it's important, but at the same time we have tons of people that want to work but don't have land. And what is our government, what the authorities are doing to provide access to land and agrarian reform, which is a central issue in Latin America and in Brazil.
Thank you, Heita. I mean, Maija, would you like to jump into this sort of story about agrarian reform? And there was a question here in the panel about what sort of land consolidation is needed. So if you're going to incentivize agriculture, if you like, basically people need to make enough money out of it. So what's needed in terms of land size or prices or greater efficiency to actually make smaller scale farming, profitable enough for a younger generation to really be interested in it?
I think the land consolidation is there. I mean, this is a thing that we've been seeing in many countries. And well, when the youth and when people migrate from the rural areas, then there are fewer people in the rural areas. So the land gets to fewer hands. And of course, in some countries there is a major issue with land grabbing and with people coming from and companies coming also from outside of the traditional rural areas and wanting to access these lands for more bigger scale agriculture. But I think also, I mean, this really boils down to the people doing the job. So really the rural women and men. And I was just reading the conversation in the chat, and I see Maija from Wageningen University also saying, I mean, raising the same issues that we in IFAD have seen. IFAD actually has been working with rural youth and especially trying to kind of reverse this rural exodus for quite a while, for at least for 10 years or even more. now starting first from Latin America, and now this is a major issue also in other regions. And from our talks and from our consultations with rural youth, which I mean have been really many, there are basically three things that the rural youth usually want to highlight. Of course, I mean, there's a stigma, but there are three things. If they are able to have a flexible way of life in terms of being able to stay part of their months in a city or in a nearby village, and then part in the rural area, or if they can juggle between their work and like in their salaried work and their rural living, and if they can also juggle with their studies, that's a plus. Then the second thing that usually rural youth also always remind us of, is the connectivity. So roads, but also internet connectivity, because now especially internet connectivity in rural villages gives them or opens them the world, and opens it also options for having incomes from off-farm activities. So for example, in the Dominican Republic, I've spoken to people who come, I mean, youth who come from or young adults who come from the rural areas. They've gone to Santo Domingo or somewhere nearby they went to the university or technical university. So in some cases, they even have a law degree, but they want to stay in the rural areas. They still want to work the land also. So what they are saying that, well, if I have connectivity, if I can do the lawyer's work also, which is kind of desk work, if I can do it also from my rural village, that would be an option for me, because then I can actually do both things that I love, because it's not always that they don't love the working the land and raising cattle and doing the cultivation. A third thing is the security, which in countries such as Colombia and also Central America is a major issue. One major reason why people and youngsters are migrating from the rural areas is actually not because they don't want, or they wouldn't want to be involved in agriculture, but it's because of the security issue. And there we have a major thing where we have to work also with the ministries of course, ministries of defense, Ministry of Public Security. And I think this is a very specific dynamic, what is happening in especially in some countries of Latin America, which you don't see so much in rural Asia, for example, or in rural Africa. And I think this is a major issue that has to be tackled also in the more systemic level, the terms of insecurity. But again, I mean, I think there are spaces and there are possibilities to give or to build those dynamics and those policies for rural youth also to be continuing engaged with their rural areas and with production. One thing I'd like to still highlight is that we actually during the worst COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown in the Dominican Republic, we held a hackathon. We were part of a bigger organization of a hackathon to seek novel things, how to support small-scale holders and the small-scale producers in the Dominican Republic in a situation where they actually didn't have access to the markets. And the majority of the solutions that were proposed, and actually also one of the solutions that got selected, they were built on like digital systems. So I think the digital landscape and digital platform, for example, for contactless delivery and to link the producer directly with the users. I think this digital revolution is already here, and we just have to make sure that we're part of that digital revolution. Thank you. Over.
So I was just about to sort of move on and try and draw it into some sort of policy and strategy implication. I mean, really, really interesting to hear what you were all saying. I guess I'm picking up sort of three big messages in how to think about going forward from you. I think the first one is this sort of really understanding the wider societal benefits from family farming or small scale agriculture, both in terms of environmental role in sort of protecting overall ecosystems and being land custodians, alongside trying to create a far more nutritious food system. The second one is, how do you then attract youth into the system? How do you make it much more profitable, interesting, dynamic, and so on? And I guess thirdly, a strategy of how do you tackle the, those being left behind, or those that are still in areas of poverty and extreme inequality, and how do you make sure you pick up those that are really being left behind? So I guess with that sort of thinking and some of the framing that you've already given, where are we at from a policy perspective and tackling these issues and taking the agenda forward? Is it about government policy? Does it fundamentally require government policy? Is it sort of directions that are going to unfold anywhere? Is it about the private sector? What are the sort of strategies for taking us forward, and what's the role of government policy in all of this? I can see you sort of starting to get a little bit eager on your seat there, Klaus. So why don't we start with you?
It's just that I'm slipping forward on my seat always.
Oh, sorry if I got the wrong.
I'm happy to take it. I'm very happy to take it, because I think those are really key questions, and it's very good that we kind of get our heads together to see how we can contribute to the answers. I really think that with these ecosystem services that agriculture, smallholder farming and family farming is providing, we are getting to a kind of shift in the way in which public policy is being looked at for this sector. It's always been supporting these farmers because they are poor, and of course we agree that very many of them are poor. In fact, it's the majority of the world's poor people are involved in farming, and there's this huge paradox of why people who are producing food actually are experiencing hunger and poverty, and it's very important to have this. But I think it's also very important to channel this support both in conditional transfer payments and also in support to the productive environment, to these farmers, to a large extent also because they are the ones who are taking good care of the ecosystem, of biodiversity, and of a safe and healthy environment for us all. So this is, I think, very important that also in Latin America we are making that switch, and that therefore payment for ecosystem services also becoming part of public policies here. And in terms of the youth engagement, which I also think is obviously very important in order to have a dynamism and in order to have innovative ideas in this whole transition, I see the main reason for that, or the main challenge for that in education, and making sure that there is good education systems and specialized education available for youth, so that they can really learn about the best ways of contributing to production systems, to marketing systems, and the employment of new technologies and all of this. There are very many opportunities, and I think it's very often opportunities which can be unlocked by better education. With that, I hand it back to you.
And just a sense, I mean, to what extent do you see policies across the region heading in this direction, or do you think there's a long way to go?
I see that there are many public policies and also projects being now developed with that in mind, addressing, for example, climate change issues, and addressing biodiversity through more diverse productive systems, for example, agroforestry systems. Those are very important, and they show very clearly that farmers are also being supported in order to make these systems work, to provide sustainable production systems which can last, and which can also help to regenerate a lot of the degraded areas which we have.
Great, thank you. Who'd like to follow up on Klaus's comments? Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Also, like, these are maybe final words because we are we have to leave. But yeah, I just would like to mention two other policies: the PNI, the National School Feeding Program. This is so important. It states that 30% of the food that goes to the fundamental and secondary schools should come from family farmers, and that is a great way to enable farmers to sell their products for a fair price. So this, for instance, has been working really good in Brazil, and also the PA, the National Program of Food Acquisition. And now, for instance, it's going on an initiative, a joint initiative of Universidade Federal de Viçosa and farmers organizations and the government to get to purchase a large quantity of food from farmers, from local farmers, family farmers, and then provide these foods to hospitals and schools and so on. So these are very, very important public policies. But then I would like to finalize saying that for developing appropriate policies, we also need a strong social basis. And then I go back to my first, to one of my first sentences, stating the importance of the organizations, farmers organizations, cooperatives, unions, and because these organizations allow a bottom-up process to force governments to provide and to develop the right policies. And then just to the final word, I think the ecosystem services approach is very crucial in this context. As you said, one of the key messages here that family farmers provide not only food, but many other benefits that can also be called ecosystem services. And apart from that, we have also the agroecological movement in Brazil. And this agroecological movement is very important to work with all these issues: gender, marketing, valuing the lifestyle of family farmers, and increasing income, and so on. And Brazil was the first country in the world to have a national policy for agroecology. And that, of course, was a bit dismantled by the current government, but we hope that we can keep developing this forward and improving the livelihoods of rural people. Thank you.
Great. Why don't I go to Milena and Alejandro, and then Maija, come back to you, and we just sort of each get a bit of a perspective on ways forward and what are some of the policy implications as you see it.
Maybe I wanted to add what Klaus and Aitor said. In Remis, we made a study that made recommendations on the need to improve more intersectoral and territorial dynamics for family farming and small agricultural farming, and as well to think beyond the gateway to rural poverty and build policies and actions with a broader focus that includes rural development and food security policies that are more sustainable. For sure, access to scholars, university extensions, and technical assistance is important, but we have to ask which kind of extension service do we really need to have more sustainable crops and protection of biodiversity. Mostly in our countries that are very biodiversity rich. And I think it's not enough to recognize the heterogeneity, but there is a need to change the design of policies. In Latin America, we have a lot of difference in rural policies and small scale farmers policies. Some countries as Brazil are more forward. Some others, like in Central America and in Colombia itself, I like not that and this point. But for sure, this requires adjustment in programs and action during the implementation and process. And this, I come back to my comment that this need to improve databases and standardized methodologies and source of information of family farming and small scale agriculture in Latin America is very important to have a better policies. And there is a need as well to improve cross-sectoral and territorial dynamics to better understand the drivers of change. And I think we have to start looking back what they are doing to learn about the traditional ways of cropping, agroecology, learn from them. They have a lot of strategies for coping to climate change, to adapt to climate change. And maybe the extensions programs and the policy itself have to start to look more in deep what they are already doing or historical have done to cope with these problems and challenges. And for sure, we have to encourage more sustainable production system to reduce cost and to reduce to the reduction of external inputs such as seeds and agrochemicals. And the policies to access to waters, technical service, schoolings, and rural extensions have to have that in account. And I want to come back to my before comment about the youngs, and because you and the public as well react. It's for sure that the young doesn't want to go from the rural areas just because they don't want to be a part in the agricultural systems, but because they don't have the conditions to live there and stay in the same way. And I think they have the potential to lead these new ways of cropping, new ways of work with more sustainable production systems, a more agroecological way of crops and farmings, and ecological tourism as well. They have the potential if they have the conditions to stay there with the tools that they may have in the urban areas.
Thank you, Elena. Really, some very good points there. Alejandra, some closing thoughts from your side, particularly around perhaps some of the policy implications of what we've been talking about.
So much comes to mind. It's been such a rich conversation. And I guess I'll just structure my last comments into research for development challenges as we see it from Anti-Initiative, priorities in terms of research and policy, and lastly, coming back to what are the conditions for young people for the next generation of small-scale farmers in the Andes and beyond. And as far as research for development challenges, I think if I could illustrate the point with a last publication in Nature, this was a global review of all the research and how this research informed policy and how it did not serve, in most cases, smallholder farmers. So many of us are in research, are in science, are development professionals, and we are claiming that we are making a difference in smallholders' lives, and we are actually not. We would like to, but we're actually not. We're not reaching these goals. So that's definitely a challenge. And I can share the link to this Nature publication. It was just forwarded to me a few days ago. I think that was really illustrative. And in terms of policy,
2050. This was the Cirrus 2050.
Yes, the series, exactly, the series study, which was how to end hunger, right? And but I would also say that, so first of all, it would be how to systematize all that we are doing, all the knowledge base that we have. And I think now the challenge and the opportunity is to make all the connections at the systemic level. So we're like, I think now making the system level connections. And as far as policy, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I do see that even at the municipal level, at the regional levels, there are encouraging pathways forward. Even at the national level, I'm happy to announce that yesterday, the Peruvian government actually, there was a decree to restructure the Ministry of Agriculture. So now it's not going to be just a Ministry of Agriculture, it's going to be the Ministry of agrarian development and family farming. So I think this is a historical landmark in Peruvian history that actually just the phrase family farmer has been officially recognized. So I think that is one step forward. However, the enabling policies at the national level are not just going to cut it, right? There are policies even at the municipal level across the Andes that are already working to make to support food systems in such a way that they serve consumers with improved diets, but also smallholder farmers through institutional markets, which Brazil, they have been at the vanguard of these interventions for a long time. But in countries such as Peru, it's still in the making. And finally, just to wrap up with youth, also, I would like to refer to an experience that I was able to participate in Brazil. This was many years ago, more than 10 years ago. It was in Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil. It was the Center for Rural Youth Development. And it really trained young people, and it widened their horizons in agroecology, but also like thinking outside of just strictly agricultural activities. It trained young people in rural environments, in agrotourism, with great capacity building, with training, and also in small scale agro industries. It taught young people how to add value to raw products. So I think there are also really encouraging case studies, successes, small successes, and we still have the challenge of how do we attain a critical mass of young people. And I think what is fundamental is any kind of rural development intervention needs to come hand in hand with the basic education and health conditions in rural environments. I think somebody commented from Wageningen, and Milena also made a comment on this that I wanted to draw from again. You know, it really is. It comes down to all of the above, Jim. I mean, it's the state, it's the regional government, it's the private sector, it's researchers like me. It's really all of us. It's like a concerted effort, but really with tailored mechanisms. But for young people, it's not going to cut it to just have an income generating activity. You know, if you don't have basic health facilities in your community, or even basic education. Many people in the Andes, in Peru, and Ecuador, and Bolivia, they attain primary education and they have to travel like 50 kilometers to go to secondary school. So this is the social problematic that it's still challenging, but I think that we can still make our way into maybe at more manageable scales at the municipal level to try to create other opportunities. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And finally, back to you, Maija.
Thank you, Jim. I hope that we're not going to get kicked out this time.
I don't think I'll dare this time.
Okay, thanks.
A little bit of trouble.
Thanks. No, I'll be short and sweet. I'm an anthropologist, so I, of course, also look at the kind of the cultural angle and cultural approach, and also the behavioral aspects of all things I'm involved in. But I do recognize that the human being also is a very economic animal. And we have seen that economic incentives can also play a big role in terms of public policy and in terms of behavioral change also in communities. And here I would just like to bring to the table something that hasn't been raised like really strong in our panel discussion, which is the payment for environmental services. And I think this is a really interesting space. It's a challenging space, I recognize that. But I think there is possibility to also to work more towards kind kind of building up those payment schemes for rural communities to take benefit of their like specific way of living. So for example, diversification of crops and the conservation of crops. It was very much emphasized by my colleague Claus. Conservation of gene pools, forest cover, carbon sequestration through regenerative agriculture and farming practices. These are some of the things that can be used also, and which can also generate income for people, which are actually not, they don't fall really into the off-farm activity, but they're kind of additional income generating activities in the rural areas. But they do couple very well with kind of the agroecology approach, and also thinking ahead in terms of how to incentivize and build an enabling environment for rural women and men to continue in the small scale farming and family farming also. So I'll stop there, and I just leave this as a food for thought and an idea to maybe have another panel discussion on.
Thank you. Good. Look, thank you all so much. I mean, I found that really, really fascinating. A huge richness of points raised. Of course, a bit hard to do it justice in the short time. It would be nice if we were doing all of this in the one room and over a glass of wine or something as well. But I've also had the opportunity today to listen to the South Asia and the East Asia panels, and I think it's really interesting to hear some of the commonalities, but also some of the huge regional differences, and I think some of the things that can be learned. I guess one of the really big messages I'm picking up from what I've heard from you all is, a sense for a whole new vision around the role of rural areas, family farmers in the context of this sort of thinking about food systems that's happening at the moment. And I think you've all touched on a lot of the elements of that sort of vision, and you've touched on some of the critical strategies for putting that into place. But clearly there's a need for a lot more work to bring all of that together and to sort of shape the public-private sort of discourse around how to make all of this unfold. So it sort of encourages me, I guess, in the sense of the validity of the Food System Summit for next year, in terms of how that can maybe bring to the fore at a more political level some of these sorts of issues, and maybe give a space for the work that's happening at a field level to get a little bit more sort of political momentum behind it. But I mean, we probably should wrap up there. Just to say that everything I've just heard this afternoon from you will be feeding into a discussion I have tomorrow afternoon about one of the chapters in the IFAD Rural Development Report. So this has been great from that perspective. We will be writing up what we've heard from you. We'll make sure that the recording of this is available online, and these ideas can feed into the next 2 sessions of the eDialogue. And we'd also be really keen to hear from you whether you feel like there's sort of value in trying to keep some sort of space like this going into the future for sharing more ideas across regions about the future of small-scale agriculture and family farming from a food systems perspective. So thank you all again. Really enjoyable, and enjoy the rest of the day.